in. Hello,
And this is on the cloud.
Yes, I'm recording. Yes, thank you. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are going to allow others to come into the room. We thank you for being here today. We are recording this session and we'll place it on our website on the CNM YouTube page. So if you miss a moment, don't hesitate. You will be able to see it beginning next week online. If you can, go ahead and check into our chat this morning. We would like for you to tell us who you are, where you're coming from, and if you would, add a superpower in the chat. We want to be able to connect with you. We want you to be able to answer questions. We have an amazing list of guest speakers here who are going to moderate a conversation that is very near and dear to us here at the Center for Nonprofit Management. My name is Dawn Stone. I am the Director of Community Impact and Equity Initiatives here at the Center for Nonprofit Management. And I am here today on behalf of our National Differences Month. A lot of people call this disabilities, but I feel that we are all able. So we call it Exceptional Abilities Awareness Month. And we're going to dig into this work from a number of perspectives today. We will dig into mental health. We will also take a look at the narratives and the lives of the veterans and those who have served this amazing country. We appreciate you all for your service. And as a former military spouse, I appreciate your services as well. We have three of our esteemed colleagues from the space who are going to take us on a journey. We have Matt Charette from Beyond the Edge, Boston Commons and Drifters. We have Josh Medeiros from Insight Centers, and Blas Villalobos. Oh my goodness, I need to get Villalobos, right? Of Centerstone. Help me with my Spanish. My French tongue is just so turned today. But I'm gonna turn. Oh, Villalobos. Close. I'm gonna keep working on that. But I'm gonna turn it over to you three amazing individuals and allow you to share a little bit of who you are and why you're here in this space. All right, who would like to start?
I can go first. So I'm Josh Medeiros. I'm a therapist with Insight Counseling Centers of Tennessee. We serve all of Tennessee via telehealth and have centers located as far west as Clarksville and out towards Hendersonville, Murfreesboro, and everywhere in between. Work with a great team there. We serve a lot of different populations in the area, and I'm really honored to be here and speaking with you all today from a mental health perspective.
Thank you. Josh is going to be our moderator today with the questions and will lead the discussion. Now let's move over to Matt or Dr. Blas.
Hi, I'm Matt Charette, and I'm a Marine Corps and Desert Storm veteran. And I'm here today because when I got out of the Marine Corps, I knew I had some issues, but the prevailing thought was there was no cure for PTSD. You just had to learn to live with it. So I spent about 28 years poorly dealing with post-traumatic stress until I found there are resources out there. And for me, it was EMDR. And so knowing that there is help, a mentor of mine told me that if you truly want to give back and you truly want to help other people, then sometimes you got to go first. And sometimes you got to tell your story first. And so for the past 3 or 4 years, that's what I've been doing. And I'm proud to say that I have friends and family and extended folks who, because I've told my story, have sought the help that they deserve. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. My name is Blas Villalobos. I'm the CEO for Centerstone's Military Services. Also a Marine Corps veteran, so Matt simplify. Centerstone Military Services provides free mental health services for veterans and their families. In Tennessee, we have a Cohen Clinic in Clarksville, and we also have 248 community-based providers who are all licensed, individually licensed, and they have experience working with the military and veteran population. Throughout the country, we have over 1,200 individually licensed clinicians. We also provide services in Puerto Rico, as well as in the UK, Germany, and Kuwait.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Blas. Well, it's again a pleasure to be here with the both of you. We've had an opportunity to kind of go back and forth on email, and so this is kind of the first time we get to see each other in person. But I'd like to begin with some of the questions that had come up in our previous correspondence, and really get an idea of how it is mental health service providers and veterans can advocate for those who really need these services and who can benefit most from them, not just for the individual, but for their families and the communities in which they reside. So what I'd like to do, maybe to begin, Matt, if you would like to share a little bit about that story that you have been kind of bringing to the front for the last 4 years, and the ways that you have worked to advocate not only for yourself, but to work for others, to give them the courage to step up and seek the help that they need.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh. One of the things that I think prevented me from getting the help that I deserved, the help that I needed, was because my combat experiences were not as difficult as a lot of other veterans, especially in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars of the past 2 decades. And I didn't feel like I necessarily deserved it. In fact, I had someone say to me one time many years ago in the early 90s, "I don't know what your problem is, Matt. It's not like it was Vietnam." And she was right. It wasn't like it was Vietnam. And so I didn't know what was going on with me. And so the reason I was able to finally get help 4 years ago is because someone told the story about getting help, and his situation was not as bad as mine. And I was like, well, if this guy has the courage to get up there and tell his story, and to say that he was dealing with post-traumatic stress in a situation that wasn't as bad as mine, I've got to tell my story so that the men and women whose situation was worse than mine and are finding it even more difficult to talk about it, have this opportunity that I can talk about it, and I can encourage them to go get the help that they need. And that's what I try to do. Fortunately, well, not fortunately, but unfortunately, on March 3rd of 2020, a tornado ripped through East Nashville and destroyed my 3 businesses. They all were right next door to each other. And I think because of having finally gotten some assistance, I finally got treatment through EMDR. I was recognizing the adrenaline. I was recognizing those symptoms of trauma, having gone through this tornado and this damage, and the destruction of my livelihood and my life's work, and the effect on my employees. And so I was able to get help right away from my EMDR therapist, and I was actually able to send my employees who were there when the tornado hit the buildings. I was able to send them as well to get help. So it's hard to explain the life change that's occurred for me, the triggers, the things that used to trigger me. And the thing that finally had helped me get help is after this gentleman told this story. Obviously, I was feeling very emotional. I was feeling very triggered, and I was drinking a lot again. I spent many years drinking. That was my self-medication tool. And something happened with my kids, and I was triggered, and I went off on my little kids. And at that moment, I knew that I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to get help. And fortunately, I was able to get put in touch with the proper resources. And it's amazing, after only 6 weeks of doing EMDR, I felt better. The trauma didn't have that grip on me that it had for so many years. It was an amazing experience. And a lot of times you think that recovery from something like this is going to take a lifetime, or just be this long drawn out process. And I tell you, within 6 weeks, my brain was already processing differently and I wasn't being as triggered. And with the tornado, when I spoke to my therapist, she's like, within 1 or 2 sessions, I could have this cleared up for people. And so that's what we did. And I want to encourage people, there are resources out there, and it's not going to be, a lifetime of therapy in order to get the help that you deserve. At least that's been my experience, and I'll allow it to the mental health professionals to share with you more about what the treatment journey might look like. Thank you for that opportunity to share this.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Matt. Blas, I wonder, as someone who oversees a lot of treatment, what has been your experience with receiving veterans and the different kinds of presentation? Matt referred to some coming in with what they might perceive as more or less trauma or instances of trauma than others. What has been your experience with that?
So I was actually, I can relate to what Matt was mentioning earlier, right? I served 4 years in the Marine Corps. I deployed once to Iraq, and I was blessed in that I only deployed once. And so for many years, I always thought, well, we have veterans and other service members who have deployed 7, 8, 9 times. And so, you feel that you're not deserving of those services, right? You shouldn't feel as bad, or you shouldn't be as impacted by combat as other people who have experienced it multiple times. But each of our experiences are different, and so understanding that, yes, help is offered, and we should accept it, and be ready to really face those challenges. I've talked to several veterans throughout the years, and I mentor several veterans as well, and that is one of the main things that comes up, right? Well, I only deployed once, or I didn't deploy, or my post-traumatic stress was as a result of something else while I was in the service, whether it was military sexual trauma or a training accident. But the reality is that, we need to stop comparing stories. Yes, they are part of who we are, but we shouldn't be, comparing our own experience to that of someone else's when we're trying to determine whether we should receive services or not, right? And that's one thing that I tell the veterans that I mentor, is that, look, you need the services, not just for yourself, but also for your friends and family. It makes a big difference after you seek services and you start feeling better, and your family feels that and sees that as well, right? In my case, my goal has always been to identify veterans as early as possible, those who are at risk, and offer services as early as possible to make sure that not only are we helping them through the entire process, but we're also serving the families, right? Oftentimes, the families are the first ones who feel the effects of our mental health, issues or challenges. We're isolating. We may be short-fused. We may be self-medicating, as Matt mentioned. It's identifying those clients, those veterans or military family members who need the services that makes a big difference, because we can then proactively engage with them, offer the services that they need, and we're helping the family understand what post-traumatic stress may look like in their specific veteran family member, sibling, spouse, or son or daughter, and we're helping them deal with that situation, identify potential triggers in the community. So now you have a family system, family unit that is able to support the veteran population, their spouse or family member. And as you're doing that, you're also working with the veteran to make sure that the veteran understands that the feelings that he or she is experiencing, it's normal given the abnormal situation we were exposed to. And so making sure that we are not stigmatizing treatment, but instead, we're encouraging veterans to seek that treatment, regardless of how we may feel as a result of, stigma or the number of appointments we completed. At the end of the day, our goal is to make sure that we're all doing better, that our veterans and their families are doing better. And, being proactive is really what makes a big difference.
Yeah, thank you so much. Something that you touched on there that I think is so important is as a traumatologist, knowing how to talk to people about the symptoms that they can expect and what that looks like. And you've both kind of touched on what some of those symptoms are with post-traumatic stress disorder in particular. There's really those kind of 5 criterion that we look for outside of the time constraints. One of them is being exposed to a trauma, whether you live through it yourself or whether you witness someone else go through a trauma kind of firsthand. And I wonder if you all would kind of help me elaborate a little bit on what that actually means, the types of trauma that would qualify, and then what are some of the other symptoms that can occur that maybe veterans or family members of veterans or friends of veterans can look for to say, maybe this might be a good opportunity to refer someone to look for help, or to have someone reach out to them.
Yeah, I think, looking at it from a family member perspective, one of the very first things that, family members mention to us that they notice on their veteran or family member is that they isolate themselves, right? They are no longer interested in going out in public. They are short fused. In some cases, they are self-medicating. So there's a very clear difference in who that person was before they deployed and after they deployed. Now, that can be attributed to combat experience, can be attributed to a number of things that are non-combat related. Military sexual trauma is a big one as well, right? And so family members recognize that individual, or they recognize the difference between who that individual was before the trauma took place and after. And so, making sure that we educate our family members and our community on what those may look like. A good example of it is, I was talking to one of my mentees the other day, and with everything that has been going on in Ukraine, that became a trigger. So that was a huge trigger for a large number of our veterans and military family members who now are worried that their service member is going to deploy. And the first question that comes to mind is, well, are they going to deploy? And if so, then here we go again, right? And so there are so many things that happen that are not necessarily connected to the trauma that we may have experienced personally while we're in the service that can still trigger that post-traumatic stress in the future, right? And so we need to be aware of those triggers, and we need to educate our family members and our veterans on what those triggers may be, and really make sure that we're offering a non-maladaptive way of dealing with that issue, right? Whether that is through additional treatment or, meditation. I mean, there are so many different treatment modalities out there that veterans can actually go through several before they find the one that really works for them. So for Matt, for example, EMDR is a perfect example of one treatment modality that actually worked for him. For other veterans, it could be, individual therapy, whether it's CBT, TFCBT. You have cognitive behavioral therapy that works very well for many of us or for many veterans. The VA is now offering stellate ganglion procedure, right, which has also been shown to be effective. So there are a lot of options out there that we can definitely tap into, but it really does start with us educating the veteran and the family member on what they may be experiencing as a result of their trauma.
Yeah, I think you touched on another good point, and that's that hypervigilance that shows up as a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the main criteria of it, that something like news of imminent war is something that they're looking out for because it presents a threat, whether real or perceptual, that the individual could be sent back to those situations, and avoiding threatening situations is a primary concern of someone who has experienced traumatic stress that has gone unprocessed. Matt, I wondered to get your input on, you have already talked about some of those symptoms. What was your kind of experience of seeking out help, and maybe what were some of the barriers to care that you experienced in finding the help that you needed and deserved?
Well, I think, in previous years, again, like I said, when I got out and I first, was having a really hard time adapting back to civilian life. Again, because of the short fuse, the desire to isolate, that hypervigilance. And then it seemed like one of the reasons why I moved from Massachusetts, where I grew up, where my hometown is, to Nashville, is because when I returned and got on the service, everyone just expected me to live and act and behave like the same kid that went into the Marine Corps. And I just wasn't. And I didn't feel like I was understood. I didn't feel like I fit in. And for me, it was using work. I really immersed myself in worked all the time, put a lot of energy towards work and a lot of energy towards alcohol, really, in order to deal with those things, and for me, I discovered a couple of books by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman on killing and on combat. Both of those books were really the first thing, and I probably read those in probably 2006, 2007, that, wait a minute, this is real and it's affecting me. And now then the question became, well, what am I going to do about it? And I still had a hard time finding the resources, maybe because so many people weren't seeking resources. And then of course it goes back to that thing of, here we are in a war, we're in a war with Iraq, and we're in war with Afghanistan, and guys are coming back, men and women are coming back, having lost buddies, lost limbs, lost, functions, and are disabled. Who am I to, like Dr. Blas said, who am I to take up those resources that someone else might need? But again, I think I just reached a point where I just couldn't live this way anymore. I couldn't put my family through it anymore. And that's really the thing, having young children and realizing that I was potentially affecting them in a negative way was really probably the biggest catalyst for me to seek help. Yeah.
Matt, when you began to seek help, what were some of the avenues that you used to find a therapist that worked for you?
So fortunately, being a small business owner, I belong to the entrepreneur organization, and through that network, one of the members was the one who was telling his story about what got him to seek help for his trauma. And I remember sitting next to my wife while he's giving this presentation, and I'm telling her, this guy is lying. This guy is a con man. He's full of it, because there is no cure for post-traumatic stress. But then when I needed help, he put me in touch with his therapist. And then I'm like, this is real. And 6 weeks later, I was like, this is real and everyone needs this. So, I don't know, life has a twist and turn sometimes that, but as you're well aware, the brain plays tricks on us when we are traumatized. And yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting road in order to get help that we deserve. And I know we're going to talk about it later, but it's just it's interesting to me that I still have friends in the military community who still work with the government, or are police officers who are afraid to seek help because they say it's professional suicide. And I don't want to jump ahead in your agenda, but I think we all think that there's this stigma or barrier, whether it's in our community, about opening up about this. So, I already feel bad about myself. I already feel bad enough about myself carrying around this thing. Why would I want to share it with other people? So, I think those are some of the internal barriers that we all face. Like, oh, people are going to think that I'm damaged, or people are going to think that there's something wrong with me if I say, hey, I'm getting treatment for PTSD, or I have PTSD, or whatever that, stigma is. Maybe you guys could speak on that a little bit to help people not feel so stigmatized about seeking help.
Blas, you want to speak to that about some of those stigmas that do exist?
Absolutely. It's a challenge, right? There are, cultural challenges or obstacles that sometimes get in the way. For example, when I first came back from Iraq, a little bit of self-disclosure, I was afraid of talking to my father about it. My dad has no combat experience, right? But he's I don't want to say you're typical, because there's nothing typical about it, but he's a very hardworking man. He provided for our family, and showing emotion was not a very it wasn't a priority in our lives, right? It wasn't until I actually joined the military that I started to become more affectionate, I guess, towards my parents. And I got to a point where now, my parents and I can talk about our emotions and everything else. But, back then when I first came back, I was afraid of talking to my dad about how I felt, because I thought he was going to think of me as a coward. But one thing that is very fascinating about parenthood, and I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I realized that, talking about your emotions with them, with your friends, with your family, it really does open a door that allows you to be vulnerable, but also supported by those who love you. There are enough challenges out there, as it is. And so I like to focus on, the fact that I've obviously overcome those challenges, and any post-traumatic stress, if you will, from my service in the military, which is great. But, at some point in my career, I realized that, the Korean veteran population, the Vietnam era population, or Gulf War era veterans. These are individuals who in our community, you can find many from each of those eras who are extremely successful in their careers and their lives, and they've been dealing with post-traumatic stress for decades. So that gave me hope initially, because, for example, one of my mentors, who's been in the field for decades now, right? He's been dealing with that situation with post-traumatic stress for a long time, but he's been able to navigate that successfully, still be, a very successful member of our society, a very loving father and husband. And so understanding that we may have to deal with it for the rest of our lives, that's important. Now, we may go years without experiencing any challenges with post-traumatic stress, but there's always that possibility that something may trigger it, right? I've been out since 2003. My younger brother's been in for 19, going on 20 years now, and I can't help but feel anxious whenever I think about the possibility of him deploying. Now, as a family member, I know what that feels like. As a veteran, I know exactly what that feels like as well. And so understanding that, yes, there are going to be barriers, but there are so many of us out there who have been able to navigate this. People like Matt, like myself, my mentors, a lot of friends I know who have been able to successfully navigate through this, and we can actually provide assistance to those who are in need. It's very important for me to make sure that as I, grow in my career, or I successfully continue to navigate, all the issues that came up as a result of post-traumatic stress and combat experience, that I share that experience with veterans in our community and family members in our community, because it does let them know that there is a way out, right? You don't have to live with that fear for the rest of your life. You will get better, and treatment is part of it, of course. Family support, support from your friends and your colleagues, those all play a huge role in it. But the bottom line is that you will get better, you can get better. And yes, you may have to deal with it, or at some time in your life revisit, that experience. but you will get better and you can, overcome those challenges and live a great, happy life.
Thank you, Blas. And again, you touched on so many wonderful things there. One of the things that I picked up from you and from Matt as well was about how family can play such an important role in recovery, in treatment, not just seeking it initially, but in the support around it. One other thing I'd love to add to that is that for those who are able to, like you said, to be able to have those the emotionally intelligent conversations with their kids to build the resilience can prevent and be such a great resistance building factor for a younger generation who are going to experience traumas of their own as they grow, that it can help to really not only break that stigma, but break that cycle and increase the resilience of the generation to come. And I think it's really important to understand that seeking that help for yourself, being able to have those emotional conversations, being able to provide that emotional intelligence to those that you love, especially your children, is a great way to help kind of cut that cycle, because without some of that emotional resilience, it makes you much more susceptible to the symptoms of acute stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, adjustment disorders, mood disorders, and all other, even physiological ailments as well. And so I think that's an excellent tie for those 2 points, that being able to seek that help does help to prevent those things, not just for yourself or to heal yourself, but to heal your families and the communities that surround them and support them as well. So one of the other questions that we had talked about in here was around post-traumatic stress continuing to impact the lives of our service members, including our veterans from several eras, as well as their families. Are there any specific efforts that either of you are aware of that are underway in your own communities that ensure that those in need receive the services that they deserve?
Absolutely. I can share my experience when I first started my career, right? Talking about post-traumatic stress was not a common thing. What became evident over the years is that not only were our veterans impacted, but our family members were impacted as well, right? You see not only suicide rates, you see, high rates of divorce, substance abuse or addiction, homelessness issues. Our veteran population and their families are being impacted by it. Early in my career, there was a nonprofit I used to work for, and we implemented a mental health program that focused on providing services for veterans and military families at the community college level. And one of the reasons we focused on the community colleges was because, at least in California, for example, about 93% of veterans who return to school are returning or starting at the community college level. And so it was very important for us to proactively engage the student veteran population and identify those at risk, and not only provide services for them, but also for their families. And what we found was that oftentimes it was a family member who was coming to us asking for help for their veteran, not realizing that they were also being impacted by it. And so we were able to provide that service for them and then eventually bring the veteran in. One great example of what happens when you bring the family unit into it is something that happened to me when I was in Texas in 2010. So I used to be flown around by this organization to participate in cycling events to raise funds for veteran organizations. And it was 60, 70, 80-mile rides. And at the time I had started to run marathons to raise funds. And so this just became another, activity I started participating in. And I remember being in the lobby of this hotel in Texas, and a Vietnam era veteran was walking by with his cane and he dropped it. And those lobbies can be very, very loud. And so there was a younger veteran, Iraq, Afghanistan veteran, who was standing by the desk with his wife, his daughter, his son, and his post-traumatic stress dog. and his service dog. And I remember him looking at him after this happened, and he just, I mean, it just lit a fuse, right? And you could tell that it completely triggered him. But what happened next is what was so fascinating to me. I remember seeing his wife just very, like nothing ever happened, just started rubbing his back. And then I remember seeing his daughter and his kid come up to him and give him a hug. And then the dog got very close to him and started trying to get his attention. I just couldn't understand what happened. So I gave him a few minutes because I saw that he went from, being completely triggered to just back to baseline almost within a matter of seconds. And so I went up to him afterwards and I was like, what the hell was that? And I was like, I just have to ask you, like, what the hell just happened? He was like, well, my wife and my kids have been participating in treatment with me. And so they know how to help me whenever something happens, right? My wife knows how to identify certain potential triggers out in the community when we're out and about. And so that helps me leave the house, go out and feel more comfortable when I'm with my family, because now I'm not anxious about, having a response to something that happens out there and not be able to bring it back to baseline. My wife can help me through that. My dog, my kids can help me through that. Most importantly, it's like they're part of the healing process for me, because now they know how to identify what I'm going through and help me through it. And that's probably, I just gave this example last week during our leadership conference. And when I think about it, to me, that is perfection, right? That is a system that has provided resources for the entire family unit, and a family unit prepared to deal with those situations with the veteran. And so I asked, I'm very curious as to what's happened with that veteran to this day. And I have no idea, because I never got his name or any of that information. But given what I witnessed that day, I have no doubt in my mind that he must be doing great.
I love that story, Dr. Bloss. One of the hard things for me to realize after I was getting help is I became aware of how much my family manages me. And they take efforts not to trigger me. And we're talking, when my kids were very young as well. Everyone just kind of knows, like, be careful about, upsetting dad, because you might trigger him. But it also reminds me of this is an opportunity to be honest with my kids and let them know it's okay. And maybe that potentially becomes part of the snowball that helps other people as well. I remember when I was growing up, my uncles were World War II veterans, and my mother always told me never ask them about the war because they don't like to talk about it. And I remember being very angry with my mother and my uncles because they could have told me what to expect when I went overseas. So when when 5 of my nephews deployed to Afghanistan, before they left, I called them because I just wanted them to know what to expect and that it was going to be okay. And all I really wanted for them was to come home, and we will figure it out later, because that's the most important thing, is to come home. And I was so proud after one of my nephews came home. He had been in Marja in Afghanistan. And when I heard him say that he was scared, and he wasn't ashamed to say that he was scared, because for many, many years, I felt very ashamed that I was scared, and I felt like I let my buddies down. And I think that was one of those things for me that was a big part of my PTSD, was feeling like I let my buddies down for being scared. No one told me it was okay to be a Marine in combat and be scared. So I think those conversations, if we can just start setting a more realistic expectation for what our veterans and what our young men and women are going to face, I think that'll help ease some of the reintegration into civilian or the regular life, so to speak.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful story too, of understanding. It sounds like just being attuned to that vulnerability, Matt, and hearing where it is that he was coming from, and being able to, again, break that cycle, to see it and to say, I was too, and let's sit in this together for a moment, and then we're going to take a step forward together and walk alongside. I think that's such a great approach. I think there's, for those trying to help, those that they know or those seeking help themselves, I think there's a lot of really good, even universal resources that exist. I know that SAMHSA puts out some really good apps for psychoeducation for families on what to look for, and what to expect with returning veterans, or how to work with someone who's experiencing symptoms of PTSD, to help them to get help, and to help them manage the symptoms at home, as well as for individuals suffering from PTSD themselves on what to expect. They'll include things like journaling functions so they can identify triggers that they can process in therapy later. Really good prompts to understand, connected memories, and to have additional resources built right in. And there's, I want to say, at least 4 or 5 different ones for different populations, and different conditions that they've put out in the last several years that can be really helpful for those who are looking for some good resources to kind of like dip your toe in, if you will, because sometimes just walking into an office or making a call to someone, really not knowing what to expect, it can be intimidating, and you don't know what to ask for, because a lot of times those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, they don't know what's happening. They're disassociating. They're not in their own bodies and minds a lot of times. And so it can be really difficult to make the decisions necessary to move forward. And this is an easy way to do that at a pace that is comfortable, that will kind of guide at least the initial parts of that process too. So yeah, thank you both for talking about the resources that are available and what's there.
I'd like to add to that, Josh.
Yeah.
For me, it was the assurance that what I was going to do was going to work,
Mhm.
and not hearing it from, someone but hearing it from the right source.
Yeah.
I heard it from someone who had been through it, sought help, and was improving the quality of their life.
Mhm.
That's so important to me, and that's why it's so important for me to also speak out, because I know it worked for me, and I know that other people have found different forms of therapy that have worked for them.
Mhm.
And I trust my therapist, right? So I have no problem at all sending anyone to my therapist, because I know it worked for me.
Yeah.
The first couple of things we tried didn't work for me. She had to break through these giant walls and barriers that I had put to protect myself for all these years. So it didn't work for me at first. But then when it did, man, it was a thing of beauty. And so I do know that it works from personal experience. And I think that's an assurance that I think a lot of people, at least that's what I was looking for. I didn't want to put myself out there, put myself in a situation where I was just showing up and I wasn't making any improvement. That to me was one of my biggest fears.
Could I interrupt and ask that you all share your favorite resources in the chat so that we can share those with our community? These are fantastic resources that you're all sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, one of the things that you had talked about in our earlier conversations and kind of touched on here is the concept of kind of layered traumas or ongoing trauma or complex trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I want to open up to you to maybe elaborate on that question, or what some of the curiosity around that is, and Dr. Bloss to speak on that as well.
Yeah, so when I was going through my therapy, when I handled all the, well, I don't know if I handled all the military stuff, but we approached that PTSD first, but then we started to uncover some childhood situations that I guess it's called complex trauma or childhood trauma. So that was a really incredible opportunity, for me to, find that help for what happened to me as a child. And this is one of the things that I share with people. It doesn't matter where your trauma comes from, whether it's the military, an accident, something you saw, something you witnessed, all the things that Dr. Bloss talked about. It doesn't matter how you came about your trauma. It's the important part now is finding the resources once you know that that you've been exposed to something that might have caused some kind of trauma. And for me, we spent additional time talking about these instances that happened to me as a kid, which was incredibly helpful. And honestly, I probably never would have got the help for my childhood trauma if it wasn't for seeking it through, because it weirdly, or maybe it's just in my mind, because I'm a veteran of Desert Storm, in some weird way, I have permission to have PTSD. But in some weird way, I don't feel like I had permission, especially from my family, to have childhood trauma.
And early in my career, one of the programs I managed was a homeless program for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, and at a caseload of 25 to 30 clients. And so, one thing we realized was that many of those clients were dealing with pre-existing conditions. So as Matt mentioned, it was childhood trauma. I mean, there were so many things going on with some of them that were exacerbated by their military service, right? Or their combat experience, or in some cases, their military sexual trauma. And so once you get into, at least with speaking about one specific client, once he was able to get comfortable with the idea that he needed help dealing with his post-traumatic stress, then he started to realize that, look, there's so much more that I have to address as a result of, all the additional trauma I experienced as a child or as a teenager. And now, now we opened up a can of worms, right? That was his the way that he looked at it, thinking, well, I'm overwhelmed. I have to address this issue, then I have to address that issue, and then that issue, not realizing that therapist, could help him process all these experiences and really get him to the other end of it, right? And so it took some time for him to get used to the idea that, okay, not only am I dealing with one thing, now I'm dealing with 3 or 4 additional things that I need to address, but I will be okay, right? And so that's important. We often feel that our story is not important. In my case, I don't share my story as much as I used to, and not because I don't want to, but because there are so many veterans out there who can benefit from it. It is a healing experience, right? Being able to share your story and getting comfortable sharing your story helps you process through some of the trauma that you've experienced. And so giving other veterans the opportunity to do that. And then, if it's appropriate, then I can bring up some of my experiences into it. But, sometimes it's important for people to realize that, look, what you see is not what I was, is not who I was, many years ago when I first came back. And I heard this from a Vietnam era veteran who said, I wasn't always a CEO. When I first came back, it took years for me to get back to a point where I felt comfortable around people, or I felt comfortable going back to school or working. It took a long time for him to get to that point. Now, nowadays, post-traumatic stress is in everyone's faces, right? When it comes to veterans, I mean, we know, 20 a day die by suicide. In the state of Tennessee, it's 3 a week who die by suicide. And so it's in our faces every single day. So how do we get what we know? How do we get all this information and all these resources in front of the people who need them in a way that makes them feel comfortable accepting those resources, right? It's not uncommon, right, for my daughter to notice that during Memorial Day, I'm not as happy as I usually am, right? Or during Veterans Day, or during the anniversary of a friend who died by suicide. And so making sure that my kid understands that my wife understands that, and they can support me is also very important. And that comes from us sharing that story, or as much of it as we're comfortable sharing, so that people around us understand what's going on. Now, I'm not saying you share it with every single person out there, but there are people in your life who have made a big difference and who are in your life almost every single day, who may benefit from knowing all these experiences so that they can better support you going forward. But going back to those resources, I mean, it's very important for us to share those with people. The more we do that, the better we're going to be. The more proactive we are in engaging the population, the better they're going to be. And we're giving them the opportunity to get better a lot sooner. And, in many cases, save their family, because a lot of families have been broken apart by this, because either the veterans didn't get to treatment early enough, or didn't realize that they were having issues early enough. And so by then, these families had to deal with all the challenges that come with post-traumatic stress.
I wonder, can you talk a little bit more about the kind of the timelines of post-traumatic stress? Because I think for some veterans, especially those that I've worked with and experienced, that they may have had some of the criterion symptoms, right? So avoidance behavior, or there are some triggers for them and they understand that, but they don't really suffer until months or years, some even decades down the road, when some other stressful event kind of pushes them beyond that point to develop these avoidance symptoms, the anxiety symptoms, the hypervigilance symptoms. How can we work with those populations who maybe have been out of the war zone for a long time, or not exposed to that type of trauma now, to still seek that help and understand that this doesn't have to happen right away, that it's something that can grow and happen, months or years down the road?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting point, because it's true. I have friends who I deployed with who, for 3 to 4 or 5 years, didn't experience any symptoms. At least they claimed that they didn't experience any symptoms, and it took a specific, not episode, but a specific situation that triggered that on them. Now, I think engagement is one of the most important things we can do, right? We need to be proactive in identifying the population as early as possible. Now, not every single veteran we encounter is going to be experiencing post-traumatic stress symptoms right there and then. They may not experience those symptoms for a long time, but at least we're planting that seed, right? That, look, if anything does come up in the future, this is what you can do. Talking to their families, educating the family, so that the family knows that if they notice a specific behavior or something different about their veteran, then they can start keeping track of it and see, whether that's actually an issue or not. We all change over time, right? I mean, that's no surprise. But when we're talking about post-traumatic stress, when it happens, it can happen very quickly, or it can take years. And so making sure that the population is educated on it, I think, is one of the most important things we can definitely do, just to be prepared for it in the future. Also, talking to the younger generation. When I was first getting started in my career, for whatever reason, I felt that there was no connection between my generation and the Vietnam or Korean era population. And it wasn't until a few years later that I learned that, well, actually, they've been dealing with this situation for decades, a lot longer than I have. So if they have been able to successfully navigate through it, then so can I, right? Or so can our population, our younger generation. So making sure that we're also educating them on and educating ourselves on what's happened in the past and what has or hasn't been done, and learn from that experience, and make sure that we are doing better for our population today. One thing I tell people, and I say it often, the way that we treat our older generation right now is the way we're going to be treated 20, 30 years from now. And I do not want to be treated in a way that is not supportive, right? And so we need to do what we can for every veteran and family member who is going through this, and we need to do it quickly. We can't just pick and choose who we are going to treat or who we're going to serve. Every veteran and family member deserves to be treated with respect and to be offered the resources they need to do better in life.
I wonder, do you feel that it would be helpful for veterans, so not just those that are returning, but those in training even, or those entering the service, to understand that traumas can, and especially in wartime, likely will happen, that whether or not the symptoms present after their deployment, that receiving counseling and working to process those traumatic events, even though they're not presenting as problematic now, can be helpful as a type of prophylaxis for preventing the acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorders that could develop down the road.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to what's being or not being done, in the military. What I can say is that we can make it to where asking for help is not a problem, right? I think that's one of the most important steps. There's such a stigma when it comes to asking for help when it comes to mental health issues, right? If we can at least move away from that and just normalize it, right? Hey, if you're having issues, you can ask for help. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking for help. I think that's a very good first step. Now, as to what steps we can take to get to this population as early as possible, even as early as them being on active duty before leaving the military, I mean, there's so much we can do. But starting with that, removing that stigma, I think is a very good first step, because the minute you feel that you are going through something and that you may need to talk to somebody, if the stigma is not there and you ask for help, the earlier you get that help, the better it is going to be for you and for your family and everyone around you.
Thank you. Matt, do you have any thoughts on maybe some other steps that would have been helpful for you? Looking back at your experience, like, I know that everyone has their journey, but what was it that you feel, reflecting on that, could have been helpful for you instead of waiting for things to develop the way that they did?
I think, like Dr. Blas said, we the way we treat this older generation is the way that we're going to be treated. And, I think in a lot of ways, my parents were of the World War II generation, and, a lot of people just came home and wanted to get on with their life. And like I said, people didn't want to talk about it. And I think somehow if we can change that narrative where it's okay to talk about it. And one of the really interesting, cool things that happened when I opened my first restaurant bar in East Nashville, I had a lot of Vietnam veterans that would come in when they found out that I was a Desert Storm Marine veteran. They would share their stories with me. And I was just in awe that these guys were telling me their story, because I grew up with a different narrative of, you don't talk about it. But I could see that it was good for them to talk about it. And I could give them the encouragement, that they needed. And proud to say that a couple of the guys have actually found groups that they could, be a part of and share their story with other Vietnam veterans. I think sometimes I just think it's that, like we're talking about the stigma of it, right? And when someone talks about their experience, are we in shock, or are we, supportive? Are we judging, or are we encouraging? It's just, I think, and that's why I was excited to be a part of this conversation, because I'm looking for additional tools where if someone has the opportunity to open themselves up to me, then I can point them in the right direction. Maybe someone wouldn't take a leap and talk to my therapist about EMDR, but maybe there's another group, even if it was just like one of my friends, one of the gentlemen I'm talking about, he just has a group of Vietnam veterans that they go sit around at the VA and drink coffee, and they talk about their experiences and support each other that way. Any little bit helps. Any type of resource helps. That's my feeling.
Great. No, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing these suggestions. I think we're going to take a little break now. Looks like about 8 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll break into groups where we can talk about some of those experiences with some of the people that are on the call here today, and kind of chat about some other ways that we can help, as well as provide some of those resources and support networks that are available in the communities around you. So we'll go ahead and take about 8 minutes and be back just before 12:10. To maybe get some direct interaction with some of our participants. And so Dawn's set up some breakout rooms for us. Each of us will be able to break out with some of the participants here and just have a discussion about their own experiences with working with trauma, or be able to possibly answer some additional questions that they may have. And then we'll come back maybe about 15 or 20 minutes to be able to share some of the things that come out of those small group discussions. So Dawn, I'll let you split us up.
Your rooms are open. Just go ahead and click that button and it'll take you right there. We'll see you soon. 15 minutes. We'll check in.
All right, it looks like everyone's returned. I got wonderful questions from my group participants. And before I open up, I actually wanted to share, there's a resource that I remember, and I'll share it in the chat as well. Come to my attention that there are practitioners, mental health practitioners here that may not have military experience of their own, or in their immediate families, but are looking for ways to help veterans or feel more confident when working with veterans and interacting with that culture. And a book that I recommend by Lynn K. Hall is called Counseling Military Families. And it's a wonderful breakdown of really things that non-military mental health care workers should and would greatly benefit from understanding about military culture, the family dynamics that exist there, and how to work with them. So I'll post that in the chat as well. But I'll go ahead and open up the floor. Anything that came to light in the small group discussion, any questions that you thought were particularly insightful that you'd like to bring about here?
One question Pam asked is if, and I'm paraphrasing here, but, in the service, in the military, our active duty service members, given the time or the opportunity to share about their experience or what's going on, what they may be experiencing, or, is it something that is looked down upon? And I shared, an experience from when I was in Iraq, and I remember if you showed any sign of weakness or fear, I mean, that wasn't good, right? I mean, you're supposed to be leading your troops. You're supposed to be this brave person. You're supposed to display courage when you're out there being shot at, apparently, but you're not given the flexibility to be afraid of what's going on. And so I've talked to several veterans and service members, who felt the same way, right? They left the military without sharing about their experience or about disclosing the fact that they were experiencing some post-traumatic stress symptoms. And the reason they did that was because they were afraid they would be labeled as cowards. And that's an unfortunate reality, right? There's still a lot of that going around where, regardless of what you may have just been through, if you show any weakness, you're a coward. I just don't understand that. And I shared this story about one of our military leaders I had a meeting with while we were preparing for, it was actually after an interview that we did for a specific series. And he and I said in private, and I asked him, how did you deal with it? I mean, obviously, having the experience that I thankfully have, I'm like, you must have experienced something at some point, right? And this is someone who's in for a long time and typically led from the front during combat operations. And so you ask anyone in the Marine Corps, I mean, they look up to this guy like crazy. I mean, they idolize this man. And so, yeah, he shared with me that, I experienced some of that. My family suffered for it, and I had to deal with it and address it, and I got better. And I asked him why he wouldn't share that with the veteran community. And really it was more of I don't know, I don't want to, or I don't feel like it, or I think it was more, I'm guessing here that it may have been fear of how the community may see him after that. And in my head, I was thinking, there's no one in the military community who would ever question this man's courage, period. And if you did, then you obviously don't know who this person is or what he's done. But how impactful would it be for some of our major leaders to come out and say, yes, I dealt with this, right? Someone who's been through multiple combat experiences, who's led from the front, who's seen all these atrocities, firsthand, and still successful, still doing great, still leading, right? Someone who can come out and say, look, I've experienced this. It is okay for you to experience it as well. And it is okay for you to get help. I think that would make a huge impact in our community.
I think that's such a great point, that the efforts of those who are in the know about the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder and other trauma-related mental illness issues can really kind of multiply their return on investment by working with those who are in the community themselves and kind of command that respect in a way, right? They're really the influencers and help to set that culture. Matt, what about from your group?
We just talked about, Greg did a great job of talking about a lot of the resources that happen on college campuses. And I think, it would have been a great addition to our discussion earlier about resources, because I think for a lot of us getting out of the military and then going to college, that's really our first opportunity to get in touch with resources. Because from my experience, I was going to the Veterans Office to get my GI Bill activated and be able to use those kinds of resources. And oddly enough, it was the first time that I was able to get put in touch with some kind of counseling help. But I was too young, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and it was too raw at the time. But through college was the first time that I had gotten any exposure to any type of help. I ended up going to things like Al-Anon and AA just to try to get some kind of relief for my PTSD. But again, it was still that, trying to figure things out. But all that was born about through the Veterans Office at my college.
Yeah, that's excellent. Out here in Clarksville, where I am, we've got the Fort Campbell Military Base, and we've also got like Austin Peay State University and several others right in the area. I think targeting organizations like that who often work together so closely to be able to identify those who are coming in, especially on the GI Bill, that makes it very easy to see who it is that could most benefit from those types of services. But like you said, and this is something that came up in our discussion as well, is they have to be ready. They have to be willing to and able to do that work, and find someone who can attune to them and help to provide that healing. In that same vein, we had a question from my group that Danny asked about what would be the expectations for someone listening to these stories of trauma, especially wartime trauma. How can a listener, someone maybe in the family, be most helpful in receiving this information and having someone open up to them, so that when a veteran does decide to open up, make themselves vulnerable, how can that be received in a way that's the most helpful? One of the things that I talked about was having your own resources. Hearing those types of things from someone who's not trained to can be a lot, especially if sufficient detail is provided. And so to be able to have space to go to process that information yourself, and also to not feel like it is your responsibility as someone hearing someone else's pain to fix it. That you can help and walk beside them, but not to take it upon yourself to be the one to change them or to make them better, because that is not helpful for the person receiving it. It's not helpful for you, and ultimately can be frustrating and lead to a rupture in that relationship if it's pressed in the wrong way. I wonder if either of you have any input or experience with that.
I think that's a great question, and I'm glad it was asked, because in my experience, I don't so many times with my PTSD, I don't even understand what's going on with me. So there's no way I can explain it to you, nor do I expect you to understand what's going on with me. So I think taking that out of the equation, I think when I get frustrated is people are trying to fix me or understand what's going on when I don't even understand why this is happening. And it's not an excuse. I want my family to know that this isn't an excuse for bad behavior. This isn't an excuse to be a jerk to anyone. This isn't an excuse to not participate in family events. It's just the way that I cope. And, you know, it's frustrating for me too, because I have family members who clearly need help, but for the reasons that we talked about before, they don't allow themselves to get the help because whether it's going to be professional suicide for them, or they might lose an opportunity that they might have, or the other things that we talked about, you know. And it's just, it's for me, it's with them, it's quiet understanding and support, and I'm here when you need me kind of thing. But yeah, I think the biggest piece for me is there's no way I can explain this to you. There's absolutely no way I can explain it to you where you're going to understand what this is in my brain, because I don't even understand what it is. And if you can be okay with that, then we can be okay.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of courage for veterans to share those experiences with anyone at all. And, you know, to understand what that expectation may be. I mean, that's another challenge, right? But, you know, one thing when I have these conversations with my friends who either are just coming back, or with students, former students, when I was a director of Veterans Affairs at a private school, you know, if the conversation came up and they share those stories, my first question was, what can I do for you? Right? How can I help you? The second thing I took note of is, okay, is this someone I can refer to the VA or to an organization that I know can help? And that was a very key component of the process for me, because for someone to share their story, whether it's with a friend, family member, spouse, it takes a lot, right? To come out and share that story. Now, it takes even more to realize that, yes, I need help. Now, you're at a critical point where you can refer that individual to someone, but if you don't refer that individual to the proper person and nothing comes out of it, you may have just killed an opportunity to get him the treatment that he or she needs, or it may just prolong that suffering, because now that person is going to think, well, you know, he referred me to this individual and nothing came out of it, or I wasn't helped, right? So I think, you know, if we are going to offer help, we need to be prepared to refer that individual to someone that we trust, that I know will provide the assistance that veteran needs, so that when I do make that call, that individual understands that this referral is very important, right? And we can't lose or miss out on the opportunity to serve that individual by referring them to someone who's not, or an organization that is not going to help. So that takes a lot of work on us, on our end, making sure that we're vetting all these different organizations and all these different individuals. I mean, I'll be lying if I didn't admit that 99% of the people I refer clients to or friends to are people who I know and I've worked with in the professional world. And I know they'll pick up the phone or they'll follow up with that individual. On the family side, I honestly think the same thing applies. You know, if you're sharing stories with your spouse as a family member, I've had to listen to, you know, my brother's stories, and my question or my response is not, well, you should talk to someone. My response is always, how can I help you, and what can I do for you, right? How can I be here for you in a way that you will benefit from it, rather than trying to just say, here's a number, or you should talk to, you know, because then that may turn them off. But just being ready for that with that information as well, of course, is important, but just offering assistance and being there for them, that individual in the way that they need you to be, not the way that you think they need you to be there for.
Yeah, that reframe is so important. The way that they need you to be, not the way that you think they need you to be. I think that's such an important distinction, and something that can go such a long way in helping those who need it find the treatment that they need and deserve. Was there any other questions or anything else that came up that either of you feel compelled to bring up at this point? If not, I would encourage everyone that's in the meeting now to save the chat. If you don't know how to do that, you can open the chat and click the three buttons on the three dots on the bottom right and click save. It'll save as a text file, but there are so many great resources and links in there. It would be a shame not to walk away with those today, if nothing else. I want to thank Matt and Dr. Bloss for being here with me today and having this conversation. I want to thank Dawn for helping to facilitate this and bringing us in, and Abby for coordinating as well. But again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of the evening. I hope that what we've done here today can be assistance.
Well, Josh, we
Yeah.
thank you all. Everyone have a great day. Abby Janice will be sending this out to you. So you will get a recording here in the next few business days. So look for that. It will also have